All right. So is this take 3 now?
Yeah.
Yeah, so hopefully no dogs barking or
Yeah.
whatever else this time. So we're going to do something a little bit different this week, and I am actually not going to read from the Bible at all.
Say what?
The idea here is that I'm going to do the entire Bible, Genesis to Revelations. That's a lot of pages. In
66 books.
66 books in one 20, 30-minute session. Everything that Shine APA is going to do for the next 3 years, I'm going to cover it right now in 20, 30 minutes. So I want to give this as an overview, as a story. I'm just telling the story of the world, the story of the Bible, and I'm going to do it so that whenever you're reading the Bible and you read the story of Moses or of David or of John the Baptist, you can kind of get an idea in the big picture where he is. Make sense?
Yeah.
So let's get started. First of all, the history books. So you start off with the history. The Torah is kind of the main thing. The Torah, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, basically tell the story of how God made the world, had all the people in the world, and then brought it right back down to one family, and then how that's gone on till today. Then you have the history books of the history of the country of Israel, Joshua, Judges, Ezra, Esther, all through here. Wisdom and poetry, mostly David. There's a lot of David songs or Psalms. Solomon was a big part of this, but a lot of just wisdom books. And then major and minor prophets are mostly people during the kingdom period, after David, and they were some of the different ones that we did. So, in the beginning, God. So, in the beginning, God made the heavens and the earth. And in Genesis 3:15, one of the biggest verses ever in the Bible was Exodus 3:15, and it was called the Proto-Evangelion, and it is when the Adam and Eve had sinned, and the snake had gone and deceived them, and God had this weird little phrase about the snake biting the man's heel and him crushing his head. It is the first telling of Jesus. And here in this very early part of the Bible, we see the first story of Jesus. So early Mesopotamian culture started in this time. You have Noah and the ark, and you have people get more and more populous, and then it brought back down to a small population again. The Tower of Babel shortly after that, and as it kept going, you have all the people in the world, but God brought them back down, said, okay, there's all these people. I'm not going to kill everybody off again like I did Noah. I'm just going to take of all these people down to this one man, this man called Abraham. And Abraham said, you are my chosen, and he chose Abraham, and then said, you are going to have land, seed, and blessings to all those around you, even though he was old and didn't have kids. But sure enough, just as God promised, he had his son Isaac that was born. So now we're going to get into a little bit about the family tree of this guy named Abraham. As you see, it's kind of crazy. So you see up here, Terah was Abraham's father, and then Abraham had Isaac. Isaac had Jacob. And then you go on down here, you see to Judah. This is the line of Jesus. This is the thin red line through the book of through the Bible that shows the lineage of Jesus. And to be perfectly honest, Lot over in the complete other side does have a little piece in this too. But you see here, Abraham was the chosen one, his son Isaac, his son Jacob, and then his son Judah were in the family line of Jesus. And then you even have here the Isaac born Sodom and Gomorrah coming through here, and then Jacob. Jacob was somewhat of a little different in here, in that Jacob was later turned his name from Jacob to Israel. And Israel had 12 sons, and those 12 sons of Israel became what we know today as the 12 tribes of Israel. In one of his sons, Jacob was sold into slavery by his brothers, and you get the Coat of many colors? Coat of many colors. The coat of many colors that came through there. And then they spent 400 years in the country of Egypt. First of all, as kind of almost royalty. And then after 400 years, actually really more like slaves. They were then led out of Israel by a guy named Moses. And Moses led them out, crossed the Red Sea, that whole parting of the Red Sea story. And then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. After this wandering for 40 years, because of some things they did wrong, they entered the Promised Land. And shortly after they entered the Promised Land, you have the story of Jericho, falling of the walls, Rahab. And then you enter a time period called Judges. And in Judges, you have a time where you don't have any kind of real leadership. Everybody is basically doing what they see right based on their family and their time with God. So after a few hundred years of Judges, you have a judge named Samuel. No, this is my son Samuel, but he really likes the fact that he's named after a guy in the Bible. So there you go, there's Samuel. But Samuel was the last of the judges. Samuel was also the kingmaker. He first anointed a king named Saul, and Saul ruled for a while. After Saul, he anointed another king named David, and we all know about David. David had several sons. The one that was the progenitor, continued on from there, was a guy named Solomon, well known for his wisdom. And after Solomon's rule, though, you had the country of Israel split. Of these 12 tribes, which you remember are the sons of Israel, sons of Jacob, you end up having 10 that went to the north and became a country called Israel, and Judah in the south. And as you're called, Judah was one of the major tribes of Israel, is the one that Jesus came from. But you have this split in 931, and so you end up now with two countries. So during this time, you have some pretty famous prophets, Elijah, Elisha, and you've got a whole slew of kings that come through in the north. The southern kingdom maintained its lineage with David, and they were the lineage of David went on for hundreds of years. But in the northern kingdom, it was kind of a mess. You remember the southern kingdom is one that really kind of held on to their identity as the children of Israel. In fact, the reason we call Jews Jews today is because they're from the tribe of Judah. So we have the tribe of Judah, and they form the vast majority of the country of the Jews in the country of Israel today. There are a few, there's some Benjamites in there, and they do have the lineage of the priests in the Kohathites. If you know anybody by the name Cohen or Kohath, they're from the Kohathites. They're from the priestly line. But most of the Jews today come from the tribe of Judah because of this split. But in the north, they didn't follow God. In fact, they set up idols, and it was quite a mess. They never once had a single good king, as far as godly king in the north. The closest they had was a guy named Jehu, and Jehu is pretty well the Terminator. I mean, he killed like all kinds of people. Continuing on, you end up having in 722, Assyria sacked the northern kingdom. And from that point, you had an assimilation between the northern tribe of Israel and the Assyrians, and they formed a culture called the Samaritans. The Samaritans are actually still in Israel today. There's about 1,000 Samaritans still around. I had a good friend back in college whose dad actually studied the Samaritans when she was growing up. And then but the south, the Assyrians tried to attack them, but they did not. So there was several different prophets and kings during that time. And finally, Nebuchadnezzar comes in from not Assyria this time, but now a country called Babylon, and they sacked the southern kingdom. And the southern kingdom in Babylon, the exile there was some really big stories. Daniel in the lion's den. You know Daniel's three friends?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, here's a little trivia about you. That is actually their Babylonian names. If you see them in heaven, they're going to go by their Jewish names. Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So if you're going to learn them, you better learn Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But you had a lot of things going on then with Daniel. You had Esther. And finally, in 538, Cyrus decreed that the Jews could return back to Israel, and they started their second temple in 535. This is the temple that we still see the Wailing Wall, the western wall of that temple is still there and a major point for the Jewish people. So this is kind of an interesting time because one of the things that God had always told Israel was that every 7 years they need to rest the land. It's something they never did. And so the amount of times that you add up all the times that they did not do this 70-year rest was about 70 years of rest. And here the land rested for about 70 years. Why? Because they got sacked by another country. So in 497, Queen Esther, we all know the story of Esther. One of Finley's favorite stories, Queen Esther. But Ezra comes back to Jerusalem. He is the priestly line. Nehemiah, two well-known books of the Bible, they come back. He is the kingly line from the tribe of Judah, and they rebuilt the wall in Jerusalem. I'm not sure what these are. Did you put these slides in here?
No, you did.
I don't know what these are, but let's keep going. So Malachi, some different ministries went on, and then you end up coming to the end of the Old Testament.
That's a big elephant.
That just shows the Punic Wars. It's just kind of something was a big thing there. It has nothing to do with the Bible.
Trojan War?
The Trojan War? The Trojan War is about this time. Once again, had nothing to do with anything in this time period. It was not in the Bible at all. But this is just kind of some things that...
there?
Because it just shows you in the timeline of times what kind of some things that happened. Oh. So, China was unified, Han Dynasty of China, but the Bible is silent. Nothing is going on in the Bible for hundreds of years. The Silk Road, 44th, the death of Caesar. And then after 400 years of nothing, you have a baby that was born in a feed trough in a little town called Jerusalem.
I thought you were going to say Bethlehem.
Bethlehem, right outside of Jerusalem. So this baby was, of course, Jesus. So the Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John tells 4 different accounts of this story, and they kind of portray Jesus in different lights. But the best thing that we can know is that Jesus was born about 5 or 6 BC, and the Magi visited 4 or 5 BC. Did you know that the Magi, the wise men, didn't come when he was in the manger?
Yeah, he was 3 or 4 years old.
Yeah, there you go. See there? She knows some stuff. So John the Baptist is considered the last of the Old Testament prophets. And it's also most likely one of the big prophecies that has been gone on that the Jews still know today is that Elijah was supposed to return before the Messiah. And so most people will take and use Elisha as he was John the Baptist. And there's a lot of similarities with the two. But either way, John the Baptist was the last of the Old Testament prophets. So Jesus began his ministry roughly 27. There's certainly some discrepancies on exactly what year this was. Baptism of Jesus, call of his disciples, Sermon on the Mount, all stories that you know. Picking grain on the Sabbath. Big deal. Remember, this is a Jewish guy. This is kind of a big deal, doing stuff on the Sabbath. And then in 12:15 of Matthew, you have one of the biggest turning points in the whole Bible. And what happens is Jesus rejects the Jewish people. The Jewish people reject Jesus, so he goes and he pivots and he turns from ministering primarily to the Jews to ministering to people like you and me.
I thought you were going to say basketball was made. I'm like,
No, Wilt Chamberlain. We are Wilt Chamberlain. Do you know who Wilt Chamberlain is? No, he's an old basketball player, but he was still the highest, most rebounds ever. So he was the rebound king. And that's kind of what happened with us. Jesus, the Jews rejected him. So as Jesus walked away, we got Jesus on the rebound. So we're Wilt Chamberlain of the Christian world, of the Jewish world. Kind of crazy. But so Jesus came and he no longer ministered to the Jewish people from this point on. He started doing parables because they were confusing. He started going to people like the Samaritan woman. Remember the Samaritans? They were the group from the northern Assyrian, and the Jews didn't like them, didn't associate with them, but yet he's going to them. He's going to people like lepers. He's going to the demonic man. So there's a lot of things that Jesus is doing that's very different. Parable, 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 because it's confusing, because it's one of those things that they don't follow well. So Jesus is going to these people. Why? Because he's no longer ministering directly to the Jews. The Jews have rejected Jesus, so therefore he is putting them on the back burner. Don't worry, he's going to come back to them. Passover, this was a big deal. It was the first one, and this Passover leads to a major point in this thin red line where it leads straight to all these times, all the way through. You see signs of Jesus, and it now comes to the cross right here. And it's all leading to this point. Jesus died on a Friday, raised on a Sunday. And then things continue going on for 40 days. Jesus, after that, walked on the earth. And at 50 days, he sent the Holy Spirit. So there were 7 days there without God on the earth. It was kind of a little bit of a weird time. But 7 days afterwards, God sent the Holy Spirit. And since that time, the Holy Spirit has been with us on the earth. One thing that you'll look at is the book of Luke. You know Luke?
Like my friend Luke, or like in the Bible?
In the Bible, Luke. The Luke actually was one of the biggest writers in the Bible. He only had 2 books. You know what 2 books he had? The book of Luke.
Yeah. And then, wasn't it like Revelation?
Acts.
That's it.
Acts. So Acts is kind of like the second chapter. Luke tells the story of Jesus' life, and Acts tells the story about what happened afterwards. So first of all, you want to start off shortly after this time of Pentecost. There's only about 120 Christians. They're all Jewish, they're all in Jerusalem, and they're pretty well all living in one little group. That's not very many people. But pretty soon they did some things. Matthias was chosen to replace Judah. This was during that before Pentecost came, so question whether Matthias should be the correct replacement for Judas, or was a guy named Paul. You had Jewish Christians, and that's all they were. They were all Jewish. This is a time called the Peterine Church because Peter was mostly in charge. A couple of important events: stoning of Stephen in Acts 6, kind of a big deal. Peter's escape from prison, Rhoda's wrong response, all big stories that happened during this time. And during this time, you have James, who talks about it, pure joy of this time of prosecution.
Is this the future?
No, this is kind of just an idea of James about considering it pure joy, and this is kind of a depiction of kind of what James was depicted by some artists, and I guess I just kind of liked it.
You're weird.
This is true. Then you had the conversion of a guy named Saul. So you had a guy named Saul who came in, was persecuting Jews, but God saved him. You know how long it took Saul to become a Christian?
Years.
Nope.
Days.
It took him, how long does it take to fall off a donkey?
A few seconds.
That's how long it took him.
Oh, okay.
How long it took to fall off a donkey. So Paul and Barnabas became missionaries, and they went out not just to the Jewish people, but they started going out to the Gentiles. Once again, all's Jewish at this time, but Jesus certainly set the precedence, and Paul really carried it out to sending out the missionaries out to these Jewish or non-Jewish areas and converting Christians in non-Jewish areas. The leadership of the church moved in Acts 11 from Jerusalem over to Antioch, mostly because of the persecution that was going on there, and because that the Christian world was moving more and more non-Jewish. Some questions they had. The first council was basically, do you need to be Jew before you're a Christian? Were you Jewish before you became a Christian? No. And that was one of the big things that the first council of Jerusalem said, was that no, you did not need to be Jewish to become a Christian. Jude was written during this time. It's a non-biblical account, and there's some weird stuff in there, and that's kind of when this was written. So that's another big thing. The Council of Jerusalem. Some of the big things that they said was no circumcision required and no dietary laws. Like we can eat bacon, and I know you like bacon.
I don't like bacon. Is this Baal or something?
That would be Baal. Prohibits eating blood on strangled animals and idolatry. So that's kind of some of the things that the Council of Jerusalem said to do was don't worry about Jewish laws, just don't be an idol. So Galatians, it's not law, it's not just law, there's also faith. Paul and Barnabas split during this time as they continued on their second missionary journey. But also during this time, 50 AD, Paul met Timothy in Lysteria, and he spent 18 months in Corinth on this second missionary journey. First and Second Thessalonians were written. Third missionary journey went from 54 to 7 AD. And this is where you have Timothy went, a whole big group. And the big thing was that Paul spent 3 years in Ephesus. So when you read the book of Ephesians, don't think so. He died most likely in Rome years after this.
Oh yeah, that's right, because he was bitten. Isn't that right? He was bitten by the snake.
We're not there yet. We're getting there. So he went 3 years in Ephesus and then went back to Jerusalem. On the way there, he got arrested and wrote a major dissertation on the book of Romans. First and Second Corinthians, spiritual gifts. And then in 57, after 3 years, Paul returned to Jerusalem. He was told multiple times by multiple people, don't go back to Jerusalem. In Tyre, this guy tied himself up and said, don't go, you're gonna get arrested. But you know what? He did it in a way. He even proved that he was still Jewish. He completed a Nazirite vow and paid for some other guys to complete their Nazirite vows, something that only Jews do. But part of the thing with the Nazirite vow is you have to cut your hair. As a Nazirite, you can't drink wine, you can't cut your hair, you can't touch a dead body. And so that's one of the big things that you do when you finish your Nazirite vows, you cut your hair. So Paul cut his hair and did a Nazirite vow just to prove he was Jerusalem. They still arrested him. But Paul said, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. And after several years of being in jail, he said, he was a trial before the Sanhedrin, moved to Caesarea. He was basically moved to Caesarea, another town up a little further north, because they were trying to kill him in Jerusalem. And then he went to trial before another governor named Felix a couple of years later. Felix held him and then brought him to another Roman governor for 2 years. So he's been in jail for 2 years and he still really hasn't finished a trial. He's had a trial, but they didn't make any decisions. It's not like it is today. They just literally stuck him in jail for 2 years. So Paul then appealed to Caesar because he was a Roman citizen, and they transferred him to Rome. On the way to Rome, that's where he was bit with a snake. He was shipwrecked and bit with a snake. And in Rome, he was put on house arrest for 2 years. And there he wrote some of his prison epistles, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon.
What is his name?
Onesimus?
Yeah, where's this guy?
So he was in Philemon.
Oh.
Onesimus was with Philemon. That was who he was writing about to Philemon. So after 2 years in jail, he was finally released and went on a fourth missionary journey. We don't know a whole lot about that because Luke didn't write about that one, but he does write several epistles. Like I say, these are his prison epistles. Just remember, he is writing these from in prison. He's then released, started his fourth missionary journey. Titus and Timothy were written about this time, and then he died. And the thing to remember about this is he wrote these last letters when he was back in jail and he knew that he was about to die. So these last 1st, 2nd Peter and 2nd Timothy and 1st and 2nd Titus, these were right as he knew he was going to die. And then about 30, 40 years later, John wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John and the book of Revelations a few years after that. And then the next thing we have after that is today. The Bible has been silent for now 2,000 years almost. We know what we need. God has given us the things we need to love Him, to serve Him, and to know right from wrong. And this is just one little thing that leads not just to all these great stories, but this thin red line that we see started all the way back in Genesis, goes through the Abraham and Moses and, well, actually not Moses, but Judah and King David, through the cross all the way to us today. And it's something that has been and continue will be. All right? You have any questions on that?
Why'd you take the airplane picture and not like the picture that we did a few weeks ago?
Because this is a picture of us, and I just wanted a picture of us, and it was a good picture of all
How
four
about
of us.
the picture of all four of us at Disney World?
Okay, we could have been at Disney, because you know what? You can take Jesus to Disney too.
You can take him anywhere.
You can take him anywhere. All right. Thank you very much.